For a RegTech blockchain company. So we look at regulations, and we're doing a crypto offering now for what I would call the enterprise for regulations in blockchain. So I think the best way to proceed is to ask each of you to say a little bit about yourself and to do one thing at the end, one word to describe this nascent industry. Just one word to describe fundraising, for example. So we'll start with you.
Good morning, everyone. Wow. So I'm Gravette Brown, and I'm the Chief Alive Commercial Officer, and I run our data analytics, product development, and new business development and marketing department here at Alive. Prior to that, I was a Principal Investment Officer at the International Financial Corporation. So I have about, 18 years experience in investing. That's really what I've spent most of my life doing. Around the world. I was working, so the International Finance Corporation is a part of the World Bank Group, and I've invested in companies in Africa, Eastern Europe, Latin America, and the Caribbean. So that's my background. I think this industry and everything to do with the digital economy and that supports the digital economy, that's a business opportunity that Alive is moving very quickly into ourselves is exciting. That's the easy word, so I'm going to take advantage of it, being the first person.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kenneth?
Could everyone hear me?
Yes,
I guess everyone could hear me. I got to speak a little bit louder, I've been told. My name is Kenneth Goodwin. Good morning. President and Senior Managing Principal at Jeanensis Capital Markets. We are a boutique advisory firm based out in New York City. We do foreign direct investment. We also do capital markets advisory as well as blockchain advisory. We advise several clients. That includes BankX, Hoku, as well as Origin Trail. My experience has been over 20 years on Wall Street. I was working at Royal Bank of Scotland as well as HSBC. I've been at the Tokyo Stock Exchange where I traded on the floor at the Tokyo Stock Exchange for a period of time. I started off at the New York Fed at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And to answer Rhonda's question in terms of the blockchain, I think it's transformative. So what I see now is I see a lot of changes that's going on, but transformative is the word that I would apply to as what's going on in an industry.
Good morning, everyone. Hello. I'll just start talking. They'll turn me on. Check one. All right. My name is Edison Sumner. I am the Chief Proletarian at the Chamber of Commerce. Meaning, hello, can you hear me now? Okay. So my name is Edison Sumner. I'm the Chief Executive Officer at the Bahamas Chamber of Commerce. And our role really is to look out for the welfare and representing the interest of the private sector community throughout the Bahamas, including looking after the interest of employers as well. Is that me? Sorry. So my background is in this area that I'm working with now, and that is in chambers, and also spent a lot of my career in financial services, maritime space as well. And I think that this conference is actually a fantastic way to move and to establish a brand new industry in the country. We are at the genesis of it now, but it's really become a global phenomenon. And I'm looking forward to seeing how we can yield some results coming out of this. So if I were to use a single word to describe how I feel about this conference and what's happening as a result of this, this new initiative, it has to be opportunity. I think that this represents a fantastic set of new opportunities for a lot of people. The Prime Minister mentioned a few minutes ago that he is looking forward to seeing some millionaires and even billionaires established because of it. And I honestly believe that if we play our cards right, that we can actually hold him true to those words and create a number of new entrepreneurs in the country who will take advantage of this opportunity.
Matthew?
Good morning. Good morning. You hear me? So my name is Matthew Arnett. I am the CEO of PO8. PO8 is the first cryptocurrency in the Bahamas. I've spent 10 years in Asia, China, Malaysia, Japan, Korea, and we have successfully already hit our soft cap, which was about $10 million. And we have been traveling all over the world, building our community, amassing all of these fans. We're at about 100,000 people right now. And I think a lot of what we see today, and it just gives me a sense of pride to be here. And I think back when the Bahamas government said, hey, we want to turn the Bahamas into a tech hub, we want crypto and blockchain to come to Grand Bahama, I think we kind of tried to answer that call and go out there first and say, look, we're just going to do it. We're just going to go forward, and we're at this point now. So I think the word revolutionary comes to my mind, and I hope that we can be an inspiration for many more Bahamian blockchain companies, so that we together can see how do we use this opportunity, which is a very rare opportunity in history, to utilize this stage that we have now for Bahamians to have a true buy-in to this industry and to be stakeholders, so that we can have that trickle-down effect that the Prime Minister talked about, so that there can be millionaires and billionaires. Thank you.
Ryan.
Good morning. My name is Ryan Pender. I'm a partner at the law firm of Graham Thompson, based out of Nassau. My partner, Aaliyah Allen, and myself are both in the commercial and financial practice group of Graham Thompson and head up the fintech department within our firm, servicing all forms of fintech from cryptocurrency, blockchain, exchanges, and consultancy in the fintech realm. My background, I'm a international commercial and tax lawyer, former Minister of Financial Services, Trade and Industry here in the Bahamas. And we do a lot of work within the capital raise and investment raising realm of securities offerings here in the Bahamas, both in your traditional aspect, and we've also done a number recently in support of blockchain and cryptocurrency launches and initiatives from here within the Bahamas. If there's one word that I had to come up with or remind me about the blockchain kind of fintech realm and what we're trying to pursue, and especially with respect to raising capital in this hemisphere, in this realm that we're in, it would be innovation. In every aspect of this, I think you have to be innovative. You have to be innovative in how you do the business, how you put your business plan together, how you go out in the marketplace, and you really have to be innovative on how you intend on raising capital, whether it be soft capital, whether it be hard capital, in order to advance what your business idea is. So I think innovation is the word.
That's a great word.
When I think of this area.
Thank you so much. So, having heard all of that, we get to how can I get funded? You have a great idea. It's an idea that won't leave you. You see a possibility. It's something that you really embrace. And usually with entrepreneurs, they say it's that spot where what you love to do, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can get paid for is where you get things started. So I'll start with Edison in terms of how we get funded. Can you let us know what you are seeing in the funding space in the Bahamas? Just expand on that from your experience with the Chamber.
Well, we're seeing, apart from still having access to some commercial bank services and products, there is a growing interest in the venture capital space.
Mm-hmm.
We do have am I not on?
Yeah.
I'm not?
You're on, but the mic is nice.
So, all right. So, yeah, we're seeing a growing interest in the area of venture capitalism. As you know, the government has a venture capital fund that I happen to be a part of, but we're also seeing some private industries who are also coming up with venture capitalism in the country. Mm-hmm. So what we're seeing in the space is that it's a slow growth, but there are more people getting involved in the area where they want to fund opportunities for others, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it's entrepreneurial upstarts or whether it's growing and expanding an existing business. Mm-hmm. We're also seeing that there are other investment funds in the country as well that have an appetite for certain kinds of investments, mm-hmm. but I think it is a case where we need, as the investing public, mm-hmm. we need to be able to put our best case forward, mm-hmm. and prepare ourselves properly to be able to access the funds that may be available. Mm-hmm. We're also seeing regionally that there are some interest also in development funds through places like the Caribbean Export Development Agency and Compete Caribbean and others. So what we're seeing really is that there is an appetite for investing dollars, but there is a challenge with the persons who are accessing or seeking to access those funds, their level of readiness to be able to access the funds that are available.
Right.
But there is a growing, like I said, it's a slow growth, but there is some inertia there nonetheless, excuse me, of funds that are becoming available to investors in the country.
And you couldn't give us an indication if, you talked about direct investments and investment to various investment vehicles. You couldn't give us an indication of what the percentage is that's in blockchain at this stage.
I cannot say no,
Okay,
because understanding that this is still a very, very new
It's
phenomenon,
nascent industry, yeah, definitely.
I'll tell you what I would like to see beginning to develop, and that is, apart from what we see as being the case today, I would like to see perhaps some of the investment funds or maybe some of the venture capital funds or venture capital companies begin to put aside parts of their investment portfolio
Correct.
to support the blockchain initiative.
That would be,
I
awesome.
think,
That would
phenomenal.
be awesome.
Yeah.
And then what are some of the business cases you've seen in terms of blockchain? I know you said it's still a nascent industry here, that people are understanding, trying to understand and figure out, is it just for certain individuals who have the technology and finance background? But what are the business cases that you've seen?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'd like to take a step back just for a second. I think what we need to do, and this here today is phenomenal. This is where we need to begin. But even apart from what we're seeing happening here today, I think what needs to happen is we need to have a forum like this that we were talking about before the panel started that will give us a third grade education on the blockchain.
We're doing that. I think
Right.
we can
Yeah,
see
and
that
that
later.
is so that everybody is able to understand it, because if you do not understand something, you're not going to want to invest in something you do not know and you do not understand completely. So where we need to begin, and this again, I think is a very good initiative. It brings together professionals to discuss this. But I think for us to get more engagement, for more people in the general public, we need to also have this discussion, but at a very primary level.
I agree.
So that it's understood by all. Once we get through that and we grow back into these kinds of situations we're having today, then I think you have more people who become interested because they now understand it better.
So demystifying this whole word of blockchain.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think it's appropriate for me to say at this point we have crypto chicks, and as Christy Powell, I don't know if Christy's here. Tomorrow we have a session on blockchain, and we obviously hope the students would come. But for anyone who wants to understand it, some things are just complicated, and you seem like I won't understand it. But until you really step into the unknown to try and understand it, and you realize it's very simple. And I think yesterday we did that with a few people. We sat down and we did it in a very simple way. And, I get it. Once you get it, then you become engaged and intrigued, and you want to learn a little bit more about it. So tomorrow afternoon, look for Christy and Elena of Crypto Chicks. They'll be talking about more about education. So Edison, what advice do you have for those seeking funding in the Bahamas and elsewhere to set themselves up to succeed? And I don't believe that there's any failure in business. You either succeed or you learn. So what do you think are some of the things that people should look for?
There's some very fundamental things that I have come across myself, and that is something I mentioned a minute ago, the level of preparedness. You want to access funds, understanding that the money that you're accessing belongs to someone else. So you've got to be able to convince those people to free up off of their cash, their investment dollars to put into your business. So you cannot walk into a business place, whether it's a commercial establishment, whether it's a venture fund, whether it's some other kind of investor, and expect them to invest in your company if you cannot convince them and persuade them that that's the right thing to do. And the way you go about doing that is that you've got to walk into these places very well prepared. You've got to have your business records in order. You've got to have your business plan that is airtight. You've got to understand your business plan. You've got to understand your numbers. You've got to understand your market, and you've got to understand how you're going to access that market and how you're going to go through your custom acquisition.
Right.
If you're talking about getting into funding in the blockchain area, fintech area, then that is not, in my view, an area that a novice person is going to walk into to try and get funded without understanding what he or she is getting into. So you've got to spend time researching what you're going to do. You've got to have an intimate knowledge of your subject matter before you go to an investor to get money from them. I'm sure Ryan will tell you he represents some of those kinds of people. And he will probably be one of the first lines of persons you get through to get to an investor. And if you can't get past the first line, you're never going to get to the people who've got the money to invest in your company. So you've got to be able to persuade them. And the persuasion comes through your level of readiness, your level of preparedness, how complete your plan is, how well you understand the plan, and how realistic is your plan, right? You can't go into a place asking for $10 million for a $20 million deal, or vice versa. And you can't go into a place asking for $20 million and guaranteeing your investor that he's going to have his money back in 2 years and some, right? You've got to be real with it, right? But so you have to be prepared to speak to these investors, because I think a lot of them are very interested in investing in Bahamian companies, but we like to see that when you approach them, even if it means having to go and get the advice you need, you might have to pay a few dollars for it, but it sometimes is mitigable for you to spend a few $1,000s to access a couple $1 million.
I agree. And I think one of the things when I come across individuals who've got a great idea and they're looking to start a business, I said, get something called a BMC done. Get your business plan, get your business model canvas done. Understand who all the players are for your business to succeed, from the revenue standpoint as well as from the expense side. So it's BMC. You can Google it. There's a really great short version of how you look at your business. So is there any indication from you of how big the local pool of investors are in terms of wanting to invest in this space?
Well, here's what we know. We believe that there is a lot of liquidity in the country, right? I believe that there's a lot of cash in the country. The banks, I think, have a lot of liquidity. The problem is, how do you get the people with the money? And I believe that this country has a lot of money. The problem is, how do you get the people with the money to get up off of that money to invest in people who don't have it and who need to have access to it?
And I think you're right. They invest in people. They don't invest in the idea, because the idea without the person
Yes,
doesn't
you
go
have to
anywhere.
bring the character, the personality, the idea, the event, etc. All of it comes together in one package. So I think there's a lot of money around. We just need to be able to find the key that unlocks the door to that money or that capital to allow that to get into the mainstream and to put into companies like our Nets company, like others who are looking to access funding so that they can make the investment. But again, we've got to make the right case for them to
and
turn
it
that
boils
key.
down to trust, and that's a major thing in the blockchain. Blockchain reinstates trust. I mean, trust amongst ourselves, trust as to where money is deployed. So even if you have an ICO and you started and it's in the blockchain, I know there are a lot of business cases now that investors want to see how every single dollar is spent. They want you to be accountable, and they want the transparency in the blockchain to be accountable. So we're going to move up. Thank you so much for that. Just great perspective in terms of the Bahamas. So we're going to now go on to Kenneth and Matthew, and we're going to go to this whole issue of what is a coin offering, what is an ICO. A lot of people trying to demystify it. Is it an IPO? But then it's an IPO, and I don't have equity, so. You know, we want to kind of demystify that for our audience. So I'll give you a quote that I read in Blockchain Revolution. I think it came out June 12th. And Joe Lubin of Consensus, founder of Consensus, said, was quoted by the Tapscots in Blockchain Revolution, which came out last week, as saying that token offerings as a new fundraising mechanism is democratizing the ability for projects to fund themselves, either through tokenized securities issued in a global context or by selling utility tokens that provide consumer membership, access to services, or access to scarce resources. Then we go to CoinDesk, which said, for the first quarter of this year, ICOs raised $6.3 billion. That's more than that was raised in all of 2017. Now, I think today when we were discussing it at breakfast, I said, you might want to take block one out of there because I think they were, $4 billion? So just to kind of take the outlier. But anyway, this relates to about 350 ICOs compared to about 200 in 2017. So what I'd like to do is to have someone, either one of you or both of you together, Kenneth and Matt, talk about what is a token. You know,
that's a good point. What is a token? I mean, we don't use the term. We try to stay away from the term initial coin offering, and now you hear the term initial token offering. I think the best way to look at it is you have to break it down into 3 different categories. You got the asset-based token, you have the industrialized token, and you have the actual commercialized token. The asset-based token, the way to look at it, it's going to be backed up by an asset. That asset could be real estate or somewhere else. The industrialized token, think of it as a Bitcoin being an industrialized token. There's no really value to it whatsoever. So if you're going to order a pizza, you're going to have Bitcoin, and in exchange for that pizza, it's going to be your Bitcoin. So that's the industrialized token. The other token that's in place is what they call Ethereum. Ethereum is a token that's actually, it's a transaction-based token. So it's used what they call gas. And that transaction is going to move from A to B. So that token is going to be that kind of utility that's going to be used to make a transaction to occur. That's the basic way of looking at it from the fundamentals. In terms of raising capital, there's many steps in raising capital. Matthew's going through the process himself. I start off with the basic concept. And you mentioned a good point about raising capital. I think the really key point in raising capital is understanding who are your investors. A lot of people don't take time to research the investor base. Who are the types of people you want to invest in or have invested in your firms, and building that relationship from a long-term perspective. So doing that type of research. So that first step is what we actually call the actual whitelisting period. The whitelisting period is a very critical period because what it does, it allows for you to go around and see what type of investors is going to invest in your project. That project could be AI, the business plan that you have in place, the ideas. People really don't invest in ideas. They invest in the actual design of the idea, which is the key. The design is the key. So now what happens is during out that process is that you actually have investors or potential investors who are looking at your design, and you're having that one-on-one conversation. Then the next step is what you're going through actually, which is actually the pre-sale, I believe, right? The pre-sale.
Yeah.
You're at the pre-sale, but even you had a private sale.
Yeah.
You had a private sale. So the private sale is actually before the pre-sale. And I love the fact that you did your private sale, because what the private sale does, it kind of locked in certain investors that you want to have in place. And those investors, the great thing about locking an investor at an early stage is, one, that you're doing it at a discount. Two, you're not giving up enough equity, right? So you still maintain your equity base, but you also build this capital support for you in the next stages. And then the next stage you have is your pre-sale that I'm going to let you talk about a little bit more to add you in it, because you've gone through your pre-sale. But and Matthew, feel free to jump in if you want to. But the pre-sale is very important because the pre-sale is actually a locked-in period. In Matthew's case, Matthew and we spoke briefly about this. You're going to be doing 45 days, I believe. But the typical pre-sale that I've seen from my experience go anywhere, and when at the heyday, was anywhere from 2 weeks to about 6 months. 6 months is, and that's great to say, 6 months is very, 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 it's for an investor base, that's not what you want. Because what happens is investors start to look at other projects. So it's an eternity. So Matthew, actually, his period of time, 45 days, perfect. Anywhere between that 1 month to 3 month period of time allows yourself to really target in a certain type of specialized investors. And when we say specialized investors, we're looking at people who understand your product, understand your design. They've done this before. They have history. They have almost 10 to 15 years of experience. Those are the types of people that you want to invest in your project. And then Matthew, on the next level, is your public, right? Your crowd sale. So your crowd sale is actually, that's what's available left for the public. So that's another avenue that you want to go in. Those are the individuals at the tail end of your actual investment spectrum. And that's the fundamental way of looking at it from a standpoint.
Yeah, that's
Matthew
awesome.
said that was perfect.
Yeah. Do you want to, Matthew? Do you want to talk a little bit about the tokenomics and your own experience in the process?
Sure. So I think every company is different. Every blockchain project is different. Everybody comes up with a different discount. So I'll start over. So I'm gonna try and achieve what you said at the 3rd grade level, so everyone could understand. So just imagine you have a company, and then you decide, I want to raise funding for my company. So you decide to break up. You say I want to raise $10 million, and you break it up in a private sale, a pre-sale, and a crowd sale. But the great thing about token generation events is that you don't have to give up equity. So this allows you to raise a portion of funding where people sort of already have their token or their equity, whatever you want to call it, in their hands. Now it depends on what type of token you have, whether it's a security or is it a utility token. But just to go back to the token metrics, you can say for my private sale, I want to give someone a 50% discount or 50% bonus. Or if you already have a prototype or a working model, maybe you already have clients, maybe you already have a business going, you're not just a white paper company, then perhaps you don't need to give that high of a discount or a bonus. Maybe you just say it's going to be 20%. And so the people that you bring in first are going to be your strategic partners. They're people that can give you more than money. They can give you media presence. They can help fortify whatever business you're doing. Once that's done and you hit a place that's called your soft cap, you move on to the next level, which is the pre-sale. And in your pre-sale, you try to have a more public approach to it. So you're out there whether it's a Telegram group, whether it's your Facebook, your Twitter, whatever, your community. So you've garnered this community and you're out there sort of just evangelizing whatever your idea is, telling them, this is my idea, this is what we're going to do. And you try to appeal to the native sort of follower, the person who is in love with your idea, who thinks that your idea is revolutionary, who thinks that your idea is sort of solving a problem now. And then once you've hit your pre-sale, you sold that out, then you move to crowd sale. So we've seen a lot of amazing things happen, especially in 2017. People have raised enormous amounts of money in a very quick period of time. We've had some companies that have raised $10 million, $20, $30 million in a matter of minutes because they've been able to just educate the community in a way that everyone is following their project. People are waiting for their project. They have a whitelisted event, and the whitelist gets maxed out in seconds. I remember there was one particular point where we wanted to get into a particular project, and we were literally sitting at the computer waiting for 9 o'clock. And when we tried to get in, the network was jammed, and we didn't even get in. And that person raised about $30 million. Just like that. But I want to tell you something. Only 8% of those companies from 2017 lasted longer than about 12 months. So this is the real problem.
Right, it is.
So this is where Edison comes in, who is concerned about consumer safety. So you have this ability to invest, but then you might not know how to invest, and you get sort of caught up in this thing that's called FOMO, right? So you don't want to miss out. So everyone's talking about it. You got to get in, and you invest, but then this particular company that you've invested in, they might not have a really sound business model.
Agree.
A lot of the people that are out there pitching these ICOs end up to possibly be a scam. And if it's not a scam, then maybe they don't really have the business base.
Correct.
It's one thing to be a developer and say, I have this great protocol, but how do you actually put that into play? We call it chasing the elusive unicorn.
Yes.
So there are a lot of people out there that are chasing these unicorns, they paint a pretty picture, and then when it comes down to the ecosystem of the token, it's nothing there.
Right, and
It's
that's why
empty.
the FOMO is such a big issue. And when it comes to the community, I know in our case, we look for someone who can really manage a community of 10,000 persons. Because when those questions start coming in, you have to be able to answer them like that. And for those of you who are interested in where you find these communities, Telegram, which raised again a lot. I think they raised $1 billion, or was it $2 billion? I can't remember.
A billion.
Billion. So Telegram is a great way to see what these communities look like and to get information if there is a project that you like. But the community is extremely important. And again, go back to trust. You raise $20 million. That's great. But what are you doing with it? It's not to go off and spend taking private jets here or there. This is someone's money, and you have to apply it to the project. And a lot of people look at what is your roadmap, right? What is your roadmap over the next few years? Are you going to have an audit firm verify or some foundation set up that's going to hold the money? And that's a great thing for anyone who's looking at custody of this money that's collected. And then looking at how you deploy the money, and that the money is deployed only after the project targets have been met. I mean, this is why regulations have become so important over the last couple of months, particularly after some of the scams we've seen over the last year. So what does it say for a venture capitalist and the traditional? I know you start as an entrepreneur, you probably would bootstrap, you take your savings, and then you go to friends and family, you go to your parents, and you say, I need some money, I need to pay the rent, and then you go down this path of people and then you get to, I got to sell, I got to go to someone else to help me. And the venture capitalist obviously has been the one that some individuals would go to. So what do you think that ICOs will do to venture capitalists?
I think it's another means. It's interesting because I think there's a flight to quality. And when I say flight to quality in the blockchain space, so what you're finding is that the venture capitalists are becoming much more educated about blockchain, about crypto assets. I think what you have to look at it is this occurred in different stages. So last year in June, between June and December, you had this rush where everybody was promoting and everyone was doing their initial coin offering. So the average raise between that period of time was anywhere between that 10 million to about the 70 million, $100 million mark. So you had this rush, you had this FOMO, and everyone else was on the sidelines, at least the venture capitalists that I work with, were saying, hey, we're not involved. We need to find a way to get involved in it. So they were drawing money at any particular projects. But I think now what you're finding specialized, smart money. They're actually sitting down and they're saying, forget about the white paper. And the white paper, when you think of, and just to use the word white paper initially, when you look at Satoshi's son, the white paper was a research and development paper. It was a paper that talked about how do you actually decentralize a platform, a banking platform, or give banking to the unbanked. The idea was, how do you get a transaction from going from A to Z instead of going from A to B to C to D to E, and you have all these intermediaries that charge enormous fees. So it was a research and development paper. But what happened with the white paper became more of a security marketing offering. So what you find was all these graphs and all these percentages of going up and down, and so it became more of a promissory note. And now what the investors are starting to look at now, the investors are saying, we want to spend more time sitting down and looking at the actual design of the transaction. We want to make sure that this makes sense, that there's some utilization, and there's actually, you talk about the community. The community is important. How do you build the actual business? How do you include institutional investors? How do you include consumers? It depends on if you have a blockchain that works with that. How do you consume other types of partnerships on your actual blockchain platform? So I think the VC space will become more specialized. And when I say specialized, meaning that you're going to have individuals who are familiar with fintech, who are familiar with red tech, who are familiar with blockchain. Those are the types of investors who are going to invest in those types of projects. And they're going to sit, and those are the types of people that you want. Because what happens is you want more raise. You just don't want the initial raise. You want multiple raises, but you want multiple raises with the right types of investors. Because they're going to give you that management intuitive, the insight that you need to grow your business.
And I would comment, many years ago when I worked here, I worked at a fund administration company. We were setting up a new fund, and a check came in for $1 million. So I called the portfolio manager. I said, I've got a check, somebody wants to invest $1 million. He said, who's the person? I gave him the name. I don't know him. Send the money back. Send that draft back to him. I'm like, okay. He said, because I will spend more time dealing with that one person I don't know versus collectively all the other people I do know. So he said, I don't want him in my fund. Yeah. And you can't say no to the investors. You can't say no to the money. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, to a degree, it's also a retrenchment back to kind of traditional investment principles. I think when the whole idea of blockchain, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency came out, as I think a few of you have alluded to, Edison, I mean, frankly, most people don't really know or understand how it works. I mean, people are only beginning to, have a really clear understanding because it does deal with a lot of intangible, right? And so everyone just saw it as something, they just saw the stock, they just saw the prices. They just saw the price of Bitcoin going through the roof. You saw the price of Ethereum, and people were just like, oh, I want a part of that. So you had a lot of unsophisticated investors, and that's why, your manager would have asked to send the money back, because the last person you want to deal with, especially in any new technology, is an unsophisticated investor. Because they don't understand the business. It makes it very difficult for you to run your business, to run your operation, especially when you're dealing with new technologies. So I think we're seeing, and I'm glad that we talked about just traditional venture, because traditional venture in traditional industries tends to be where you see where the kind of the rubber hits the road, because you're dealing with very sophisticated investors who know exactly what they're doing, and they're really readying your business for market before you go out to have a float, where you're opening up your investor pool to your mom and pops, to your small time investors. So somebody's already kind of kicked the tires, and I think what we saw with a lot of the blockchain technologies and potential investments previously was that that process wasn't occurring.
Correct.
Nobody was kicking the tires. Nobody was really doing the due diligence. And that was a factor, I think, because people didn't completely understand what it was they were investing in,
Correct.
how the business models actually worked. Like, what does it really mean? You know, are you investing in exchanges? Are you investing in the tokens? You know, are you going to specialize in a certain sort of transaction? Many people didn't really understand like what it actually meant. And now, as the bottom has fallen out, and because there are bubbles, and I think we have to caution anyone who's looking at it. And as we think about how we develop this industry in the Bahamas, we have to think about, you know, how do you know, what does that mean when we say we're developing an industry here? What does that mean when we say we're bringing blockchain here to the Bahamas? Does it mean we're creating and we're facilitating exchanges? Does it mean we're going to have, you know, a new raft of, you know, tokens and currencies being created here? Does that mean we're going to be participating and, you know, in creating a bubble-like atmospheres? So there are a lot of things that have to go kind of part and parcel. And it's that kind of push-pull tension between allowing, you know, it's the liberalization of the sector that's allowed the innovation, right? I mean, that's where you find the greatest set of innovation, with also protecting investors, investor groups and investor pools. So that's the challenge.
And I agree. And I think it's financial literacy as well. You know, to educate, to say you're going to bring, you know, digital currency to the Bahamas, and you have an uneducated community. Well, that's not going to work. I don't know, Ryan, if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, from
the regulator standpoint.
Yeah, I think we've entered a space now where you see a lot of questions and uncertainties on what do you actually do with this new form of investment, and you're going to hear from the regulators later today, and I think it's very important with what's the regulatory framework, and the regulatory framework to get it right, to achieve the right balance, because now we're talking about how, I think you said 8% of the offerings actually lived past how many months? 15 months, which is an extraordinary failure rate. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, back in the day they used to say only half of the small businesses make it. Okay, well now we're talking about only 8% of the offerings are actually in existence after 15 months. I mean, that is an extraordinary failure rate. And that is an extraordinary number of investors. Many of them likely retail investors.
Correct.
An extraordinary number of retail investors that have lost money, that will never see the money back, because most of these investments were not asset-backed. If not all of them were not asset-backed.
Equity.
So you are not investing in anything other than space. And this is now, when you make that run-up and you have that extraordinary failure rate, and you have that extraordinary loss of investor capital, this is what gets the concern of the regulators. Because the regulators, their job is to protect the interest of the investor, not the person that is creating the investment opportunity, but to protect the interest of the investor, the person that is putting the money into this offering. And so you have to, I think, in order today, where we're moving into a realm of fewer retail ad hoc investment and more sophisticated professional investor into these offerings, you now have to have a regulatory regime that, one, gives confidence in the jurisdiction that it's properly being managed with respect to these offerings, but on the other hand, remaining flexible enough to be able to be a jurisdiction that is attractive to these types of offerings that were created because of overregulation, effectively.
Yeah.
And that's really the challenge of a jurisdiction, a platform, and where we have to be in order to, one, attract this fintech business. And we're not only talking about ICOs. To your point, we're talking about exchanges. We're talking about all other components of fintech around this, advisory functions. And I think it's important also to know that your investment is actually investing in a project. You're just not, I called it air before, but that's because there was no asset back. But you're investing in a project and expecting a return from a project. And you know, being able to do that analysis is very important. So I think the regulators have in the Bahamas, although I proclaim we probably have the brightest regulators in the financial services area that exist, but they have a significant challenge to be able to come up with this regime that's, one, responsive enough to the private sector to encourage the industry, but also responsive and responsible enough to the investor to have confidence in the platform. And that's really a challenge. We don't want to be known as a jurisdiction, in my opinion, that is regulated and is a haven for these massive failed offerings because it's so easy and wishy-washy. But we also don't want to be a jurisdiction where we've now turned ICOs and blockchain raises into a regime that is more akin to bank regulation. And that's the challenge.
And I think it is a challenge. And I always say that
Rhonda, can I add something
Sorry,
here?
go ahead.
Because I think the key thing that the audience have to separate is you got to separate between cryptocurrency investing and blockchain technology investing.
And other ancillary fintech that
right,
come around.
that's the key that you have to really separate. And I think you hit on it on both ways. The cryptocurrency, crypto asset investing, that's something that you really, really want to look into very, very carefully, cautiously. Take your time. The blockchain technology itself is the infrastructure. And that's a little bit more different. And that's going to require not just building a community. Matt, you can speak a little bit more on that. But it's a technology itself. So that is a different type of investment vehicle. And in that vehicle, you're going to look at that from a longer term perspective. And that's really where I think that the community needs to have a better type of communication on and education, separating the two. This is what I tell my investors. This is what I tell my clients, is let's really focus mainly on the technology. Let's focus on trying to improve the technology. If you have an idea or a project, how does that impact different types of individuals or different types of members in the community? And whether or not you can grow that via the technology itself. If you reinvest the funds back into the technology, then you add value. And that's really the key right there, trying to create value.
You. Matt, you want to
So,
chime in?
yeah, because I want to sort of bring this home a bit. So exactly what Ryan said is correct. So then what do we do as a country then? What is the answer? Because that's what we're here for. So the answer then, as the regulators try to regulate, is for the Bahamas to be the gold standard for the industry. So here's what we do. We tell people when you come to register your ICO here or your blockchain project, we're going to do a bit of due diligence on you.
Of course.
So then that gives the entire industry confidence that when I see a Bahamas registered blockchain company, I can invest in that securely. They know that if I put my money there, at least this person isn't going to disappear because the Bahamas government has all of their passport information, so on and so forth. What else is a big problem for blockchain companies? Bank accounts. What is the Bahamas great at? Banking. So let's give them bank accounts. Let's let them park their money here, pay our accountants, pay our lawyers for services. Pay the lawyers first,
he says.
right? And pay the lawyers first.
Accountants in the room.
And then what happens?
Join me.
Globally, what happens is everybody says, okay, if I see a company that has a Bahamas sort of stamp of approval, I know this is a gold standard company.
Correct.
Then I will invest in them. That is what we have to do.
And I agree with that. And I think that is worth and the reason I say that is once the money is gone, it's gone. And then if you've invested in something and you've not been seeking advice to that particular project, and then you go to the government and say, well, I invested like, I don't know, $50 or $100 or $10,000, and the guy has disappeared, well, they're going to say, well, wait a second. You have to go back to that. Sorry, go ahead.
I think Matt raised a very good point as well, right? If you're talking about setting up the Bahamas as a gold standard, and he raised a very important issue regarding banking, that we've got to do some things to improve the way investors get banking done in the Bahamas so that they have easier access to getting bank accounts.
No, I agree.
They have easier access to the funds in those banks. I know that the central bank, for example, and I applaud them, they started this initiative.
John is here, and I think he'll speak a little bit.
The governor's here about Bahamians being able to access foreign currency, operating in foreign currency accounts up to a certain amount, and I'm sure after a while the bank may be prepared to revise those limits as well. But for us to be able to track the kind of investors we're looking for, especially in this whole fintech space, there has to be a conversation about banking, right? And how we can improve the efficiency and the access to banking in the country as well.
Yes.
So we cannot avoid that conversation.
And then if we have de-risking across the region, that is a massive problem because you cannot reach the retail market.
Yeah,
right?
well, you hit on another thing that's going.
Oh, sorry.
That's a whole other conference to talk
Another
about bank
conference.
de-risking. That's been a challenge in the region, and we're seeing a lot of the commercial banks now sort of falling prey to that in some form or another, especially as it relates to their corresponding banking relationships.
Yes.
So that is something that's happening, and we see it's already shown its head in places like Belize and other countries in the region. And I believe the Bahamas, so far, we believe that they're still a bit protected from that, but we still have to be cognizant and keep those
Right, because if you
things
can't get the
before
money,
us.
right, because if you can't get the money, then the discussion we have right now, it doesn't, it's definitely. Go ahead, Ryan.
And just as corollary on the banking, and I think it's important that this be discussed, because I know, the working group that's putting together this framework of registration or regulation in the Bahamas is also talking about banking in the Bahamas and whether these offerings have to be banked in the Bahamas or not. And the fact of the matter is, I think it's cognizant that we recognize we are a global cross-border industry. And you don't want to impose restrictions on these types of cross-border functions that will only cause you to be unattractive rather than more attractive. So let me give you an example. If you say, if you're going to do an ICO in the Bahamas, you have to bank a proportion of that in banks in the Bahamas. And then you say, well, the first answer is why, or question is why. And the second question is which bank. And at this point in stage, I don't know if there is a bank that will take it. And so the point I'm trying to make is, especially when you're dealing with banking as a function of this kind of technology, this kind of offering, and this kind of capital raising, you have to allow you the flexibility of the complete international financial and banking markets, and not think that if you try to pigeonhole yourself because you want to use your own financial services products, and you mandate that you're going to be attractive to anybody, because then the first one that is unsuccessful, we know how word spreads, especially in this industry, then you really shoot yourself in the foot as a jurisdiction.
Yeah.
So being able to allow as wide a cross-border framework, as wide a planning framework with good world-class regulation is, I really think, the key to the flexibility and the protection that we need
I
as a
agree.
jurisdiction.
Thank you so much for that. And I'm mindful of time because I want to leave a few minutes for questions. So we're going to go, we've got probably just about 5 more questions, and I think I'll do it across both of you, if that's okay. So Matthew, I mean, in terms of what you're doing now in your fundraise, can you give us some insight as to how you knew the yes, do it? Because once you know the yes, that's the thing that's going to get your funding, because the investor is looking at you. So see if we can do that in a minute. I know that.
Okay, so I think Ryan brought up a good point about having something that's asset-backed. And so that is what we sort of created as a blockchain project, is that everything that we've issued is asset-backed. So we've been focusing on our blockchain project in an area that's called ERC 721 and NFTs, which basically means that they are tokens that are representative of a real asset.
Correct.
So that's something real that exists, because we heard this cry that, what are you investing in? Like Ryan says, you're investing in air. So we wanted to sort of focus on another category that would sort of give us that sort of foundation for where people can sort of calculate very easily, what is this what is this worth? And then how do we create a marketplace for people to trade and buy these particular set of assets? But how you know the yes, I think being in Asia for more than 10 years, I'm reminded of something with Esther when she was told she was here for a time like this. And at that very moment, when all of this came about, we wanted to create a blockchain project that was a solution for a problem.
Correct.
So that is how I knew there was a yes. We knew that there was a problem that we really cared about in the Bahamas that would have enough impact economically, socially, and otherwise for us to move forward. And so naturally, it was just the next step that we had to take, was to just go and do it.
Right.
So that's kind of how you know the yes.
And I think that's the key, because if you are an investor and you're talking with someone and you don't feel that they are passionate and they believe in their project and they're going to be there for the long haul, because there is the whole idea of there is the notion of the project, and raising the money. And then you get to, can you run a company? Because now you've got to be able to take that money, deploy it, and get the right advisors and partners on board. Not everyone can do that. Some people, oh, I'm just here. This is it. I need another CEO to take the vision of the company forward. And I think that is key to what you just said. So, Ryan, I'm going to touch a little bit now on in terms of how do you create an entity, right? What are the types of investment vehicles that we would use to try and raise money? Can you expand on that?
Sure, and it really depends on what you're raising money for. I think we started this out by saying, well, what are we raising money for? What's the project? I have a real estate development project, and I'm going to issue ICOs on that project, and you're going to get your return on sales of projects and properties. That's one. Or I have the infrastructure. I have the actual blockchain I'm building, and you're going to be investing in the infrastructure itself. And so I think that the first question is, what's the project and what's the investment? Because I think depending on what the investment is and the risk element is, that depends on the flight to quality or not. And so if it's a high risk or risky and complex kind of project and offering, I think you're going to see more sophisticated types of investment vehicles coming to the table. So for instance, at Graham Thompson, we've done a number of investment funds whose investment strategy is this space, whether it be ICOs or whether it be other fintech-backed type of projects and what they're going in. And so if you have a sophisticated project or a project that requires a lot more disclosure on what the investment is, who the operators are, and who the service providers are, you're very likely going to see some form or fashion of a regulated investment fund, whether it be a private equity fund or whether it be a small kind of startup incubator fund, come to the table to provide some capital investment into your project. If, on the other hand, you are a service provider in the space or building the infrastructure within the space, crowdfunding may be a more available mechanism to raise some soft capital to get off the ground, because you're putting it into your technology and your service providing business and the like, and you may see opportunities for more crowdfunding in that space. And I would hope that the head of the Securities Commission this afternoon speaks a little bit on this, because I know she has a policy initiative that they're doing within the Securities Commission to allow crowdfunding and microfinancing more available in the Bahamas, bringing a lighter touch regulation while keeping the protection for the retail investor in place in order to be more effective in raising capital in that fashion. So, I think in this space you're going to see the type of investor and the type of entity that's coming in to invest in your project really a function of how, one, sophisticated your project is, how risky it is, how much you're trying to raise. You may not need that much in the beginning, and therefore you may be more attractive to a wider crowd financing, where if you're looking to raise a lot more money in the near term, the private equity investment fund mechanism is likely going to be the type of investment. So I think it's very important for those who want to go in this space. One, define really exactly what you're going to be doing. Put that on paper as comprehensive as you can get. Because if you are going to go to the market to a sophisticated investor, and you may be deemed offering securities, depending on how it's structured, you're going to need the full prospectus, you're going to need the full evaluation business plan, the full white paper, in order to just protect yourself and meet the regulatory requirements you may have to meet.
Thank you. And I think the one thing and thank you for that, I think that was awesome to give us the regulatory and legal perspective. But I think the most important thing is that whatever your project, you need to understand that. Because it may sound, oh, this is a great idea, and then someone starts to kick the tires. And somewhere along the lines, they're like, doesn't make sense. Something you did not cross a T in there somewhere. And then that fails. The other thing is investors want to know, how are you going to where's the return? Everybody wants to know what's the exit plan. Or also, if you are doing the fundraise, they want to know if it's 6 months, how are you going to take care of yourself? Are you going to be, if you financially don't have the money to pay your bills, to travel, the marketing spend or whatever, they're going to say, well, I'm concerned about that, right? So they're going to ask a lot of questions. So to get funded, you have to say, well, if I with that investor, what would be the questions I would be? If I'm giving that person my money, what would I ask them? And then you should get a perspective in terms of how you should look at your project. You have to do that. So
I was going to say, and it also...
I'll just say we have 1 minute, and then I'd like to open it up for questions. Sorry.
Sure. And it also alludes to how we are prepared ourselves, within the country to sustain these sort of industries, because as Ryan and everyone else on the panel has alluded to, I mean, there are a number of knock-on industries that come out of this, and one of them is really M&A. And when we think about how we have, how finance has been organized in the Bahamas to date, and what sort, and this is a different type of finance. This is corporate finance. This is investment banking, and this is a practice that we traditionally don't have here in the Bahamas. This is Wall Street and valuations, those sorts of things. So it really does, create all of these questions about, okay, so that means, how do we work with new partners, with external partners, or with foreign partners? I mean, these are the things that we have to begin to think about as we move forward. Also with the technology, I mean, with everyone here, I mean, several of us who are Bahamians here, I mean, we've had quite a bit of international experience or abroad. So, what does that mean for opening up this industry to kind of the rank and file, folks who are here? How do we support? And I was heartened to hear, Minister Thompson just speak today about a lot of the initiatives that are being put in place to ensure that we have that bench coming up, in terms of educating, younger folks in technology and finance, et cetera. But what do we do now to support this industry today, right? Not 10 years from now. So.
I think the most important thing I've seen in the ICO space is that of collaboration. If you've got to build your AML, or you've got to build a U-port or something on top of your project, you've got to collaborate. That gets you to market faster, because this industry is so fast moving, it's so nascent, it's changing. So if you're like, well, I want to keep it all to myself, you have to collaborate, and that means collaborating globally. And one of the things that at a conference last week was people are traveling. I mean, many of us travel all over the place. We go to places we never would think, because we want to learn. We want to find somebody else that we can collaborate with at some point, to be able to get our project to be something that people starting to use. So I'm mindful of time. I've got like about 10 more questions. This has been an amazing discussion. I hope it was useful. So I open it up if anyone, we can take maybe three questions.
While you wait for your
sorry.
While you wait for the questions to come, let me just say that when you talk about funding also, I want to say, I think Keith Davies is in the room somewhere, who heads BISIX. Keith. So Keith is actually working on a fantastic plan as well for a small alternative markets fund at BISIX that will allow persons who aren't able to access that big money to be able to present themselves to BISIX to raise, I think it's a cap of maybe $3 to $5 million that he's currently working on an SAM. So that will present a whole new level of opportunity for persons who want to access funding through the capital markets route.
That's
to
awesome.
get the business
That's awesome.
funded.
That's awesome. Keith. We'll take just a few questions, because I'm mindful of the hard stop in a few minutes.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay. Hi. I guess toward Mr. Edison, I believe. Sir, how would a person in technology world gain access to the Bahamian fund you had mentioned? And what types of projects is that fund actually looking at supporting?
Yeah. So I made mention of, I think you're referring to the venture funds. So there is the Bahamas Entrepreneurial Venture Fund is looking at all kinds of funding, right? Technology is one of them. There is a limit, though, to the funding that's available, because the resources are limited. I think you can access at this point up to $300,000 through an equity investment and $200,000 through debt instrument. And it's really a matter of just presenting yourself. There's an application process. There is an administrator in place. There's also a board of directors who ultimately approve the investment proposals. That board meets every month to review the proposals, but there is a full-time administrator that sits and accepts and receives proposals on a very regular basis. There is another private entity that I'm not at liberty to speak about in this forum, but there is another group in the country who's doing some level of venture capitalism, and they're looking also at a cross sector of industries. Perhaps we can have that conversation offline.
Yeah, I think you
because
can
I've not been
all
authorized to
just
speak.
get his
speak to
business
that.
card.
Yeah.
Let's get some money in the
All right.
economy.
But if you're interested, the phone number there at the Venture Fund for those who are interested in reaching out for information in Nassau is 3564114. Ask me how I know that so easily. I call it all the time. 3564114. And you can speak there with the administrator, and she'll be able to guide you through the process of getting applications submitted.
Thanks. And I think we have a question over here.
Yes, ma'am. Is this on? Can you hear us? Not a great voice.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, so Arnold Strong, I'm with Unify Earth. We're actually, our holding company is domiciled in Nassau, but ultimately we're setting up here in Freeport in Grand Bahama.
Congratulations.
8/18/18. So I unfortunately, I stepped out for part of the panel, which reluctantly, because we did our conference call, and I had to tell them the awesome work that's happening in this beautiful space.
Oh, thank you. Get another one.
So it may have already been addressed, but just from a term of really provision of technological provision here, of really telecommunications architecture, just can anyone address the real redundancy of communications here inside, if that's even been spoken to drive that innovation, to drive that real infrastructure here on site?
And we've got about a minute, half a minute to address that. So I don't
Revetta's the
okay, there we go.
communication specialist.
It's your question.
And I know we have some time set up later, but no, I mean, Grand Bahama, and indeed the Bahamas, has one of the most robust telecommunications infrastructures, not just in the Bahamas or in the Caribbean region, but in this region, including the Florida and South Florida basis. So we have several redundancies. I can take you through our architecture later, but just to say that, between within the Bahamas in terms of, loops, our fiber loops, and also even reaching out to South Florida, where we have an investment, where we have a cable company that we owned. We have multiple redundancies to ensure that you can stay online. And I think the infrastructure and the telecom infrastructure we have in this country is one of the biggest reasons why we've started this whole technology hub, and specifically here in Grand Bahama. So we have some direct links from Grand Bahama to South Florida and on through the rest of the islands in the Bahamas and outwards. So.
Right, thank you.
Yeah.
And to the point I made earlier about connecting and networking and getting connections or people in the industry, I would say, not to troll them, of course, but to try and get to speak with all these individuals. I mean, we had a ton of questions we're not able to answer in this time frame, but use this particular venue to network. Something like this, you just, it's very easy. I say to people, if you don't have a business card, take a picture of the name, go on LinkedIn. If you're not on LinkedIn, get on LinkedIn. And then you connect with that person, and you can then, have a message or the conversation within LinkedIn about when you can talk. Because I think there's a lot more you can take away from here with respect to if you've got an idea and you walk around all day, there are problems to solve. And you're like, boy, that's a problem. Plastic's a problem. Conch shells piled up over there. All of those things you can tokenize. I think that's the word we're going to say. You can do something, and you can be paid for cleaning up the planet. You can do so many things. So don't limit yourselves. You're limited as to how you think about things and maybe your program thinking. But be exponential in your thinking. You have a question. Minister, I think, has a question.
Minister.
Or comment maybe, and then we yeah.
Here you go, Minister. I'll come and help you out.
Ryan.
You only hear the end of that.
You work hard. You work
Thank you.
hard.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I just had a question, particularly with raising funds because I wanted to get the panel's view on if the government should get involved in raising funds through ICOs or through those different means when it comes to raising funds. And I just wanted to get the panel's view.
Government?
So
budgetary
government.
purposes.
So put the
for,
government,
for spending on
so put that in the blockchain
projects
for the people to see it.
and
Is that what
different
you're
things.
saying? Is that what you're thinking?
Correct. What is the government,
I
whether
think
or
that's a
not the
phenomenal
government
idea.
should be raising funds
You should use the technology.
through
Wow.
Raise the
ICOs
funds.
and getting involved in that space?
Edison, why don't you take
Because
that?
that's a different.
That's going to take me a while.
Ooh, that's a.
What I
I'll let
think you're
Edison
saying
run
is
on
if
that
you
one.
were to do an ICO for the Project Bahamas, whatever that is,
Wow.
and that is in the blockchain that's being monitored for the entire country to see, is that a possibility for a government? That's a good question.
That's a
I
good
don't
question.
know if there's anyone in the audience who would want to answer that one, but is that being done? Is that a project anywhere? I don't know.
I don't think that
Yeah,
is.
it is a
I think the
project.
closest is
blockchain.
probably
It is a project. somewhere,
right.
yeah.
I don't know if there's a government. I was going to say Estonia is probably the closest.
Yeah, Estonia is
Right.
great. Is a great
Venezuela has
example.
done. Venezuela has done one was asset backed by the oil, where they were using
Right.
oil reserves
Yeah, there was
to
one other
raise
country
capital.
Yeah.
So if you have an asset that's an asset backed, maybe in that case, but the technology could be applied. So there's the funding side, but there's also the actual implementation of the technology, which can actually be very useful, as you mentioned, in terms of communication, voting, in terms
Land
of right,
titling,
land,
yeah.
land
Digital-
You know,
titling.
Digital
any number of
community.
issues.
I think it's possible.
But also, there's
Yeah.
a sovereign wealth fund legislation in the Bahamas as well, right? Where you might be able to use ICOs and offerings to support any investments that the sovereign wealth fund may want to undertake, especially when the sovereign wealth fund is receiving revenues from certain projects in the Bahamas, whether they be oil and gas or whether they be some other type of project that's generating a return. Also, one thing the government could look at in this space, in my opinion, is, and it's going to take some project reform, but government corporations. I mean, to the extent that you want to raise capital for government corporations, but you may have to make sure those government corporations are profitable and make a return, and because you want the general populace to be able to invest in these, to be able to see a return in the future and say they are owning piece of a infrastructure project or a government corporation. But you have to tackle, I think, in those instances first, whether those government corporations or those projects are actually positively earning corporations or continue to be subsidizing and I think that's part of the concern with government in that.
And I think we have we have some authors here and some others who are in the space. I think that's a really great question to also. I know I've seen something in Venezuela, but there's another country as well that's done something. But I think that's an excellent opportunity, and actually, it's probably the best way to end this this particular part of the conference. So we've heard how you heard a lot about how to get funded, and I hope that this has been insightful, engaging, and exciting for all of you. And I thank you for your attention. And please, one more question. Oh, okay, boy, I tell you, okay.
We can do this
Sorry,
all
go
day.
ahead. I do
Good morning.
apologize. We've got a minute because I'm really.
I wanted to ask this question. Freeport being not government controlled and is partly controlled by the Port Authority, Grand Mama Port Authority. How do we see the blockchain and the cryptocurrency working in Freeport when the Port Authority is the major licensee?
Blockchain, I don't know. Somebody, you can speak to that. Are you going to speak to that later, or are you going to speak to it now? You can speak to it now, briefly, just a minute.
I'll help out the GBPA as well.
Yes, you had mentioned that.
I think we need the town
You had
hall.
mentioned that the Port Authority is the licensee, business licensee. We also issue permits. Now, if you're familiar with blockchain and understand what it is, it's quite easily adaptable to our processes, meaning we are looking right now, we're talking with an entity to help us introduce blockchain in the various processes, like the permitting processes and the licensing processes at this very moment.
Wow, that's good information. So I want to thank all of you for your attention. I hope this again was an engaging panel. If you have more questions, please don't be shy. And then at this point, we're dismissing for lunch, and I've been told to tell you there's several restaurant opportunities. Across the street, you have the Port Lucayo Marketplace, and of course here in the hotel, there are a number of places you can eat. We want you to enjoy a little bit of the Bahamas. The straw market is over there. Got some conch salad, got some conch fritters. Go enjoy that. And come back here at 1:30 for the technology sector in the Bahamas is open for business. Cryptocurrencies, ICOs, exchanges, which will be moderated by Dr. Donovan Moxley. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks, Ryan. Matthew, thanks.
In wanting